Well, here we are again.
Indeed. And what a weighty task we have in front of us now.
Just call for more coffee. Too.
Oh, no. More coffee.
Well, thank you, both of you, for staying back for an extra day so that we could at least have our preliminary deliberations on a face-to-face basis.
Not at all, Michael. I think it's always a good idea for the tribunal to stay on and exchange views face-to-face. Later issues we can pick up by email or what have you.
Yes.
Well, can I propose then that we tackle today's deliberations in an issue-wise manner?
Sounds good to me. Let's go issue by issue.
Certainly. Let's be wise.
Shall we begin?
Well, can I perhaps
Please,
jump ahead
go ahead.
first? Great. Michael, Kevin, I mean, it seems to me, first of all, that there really isn't a dispute about the applicability of the convention itself. So if you agree, then perhaps we can start off dealing with the issue of Article 53 of the convention. You look skeptical.
No, to be frank, I was more than half expecting the respondent to contest the application of the convention.
Yeah. But I was too, but in fact, at the end of the day, it seems they both agreed that it wasn't an issue.
Particularly considering that there is a strong elements of service involved, and then their damages in claiming is also involved to service contract.
Maybe, yeah. I see what you mean.
Well, I take a slightly different view. I actually agree with the claimant's argument that the sale is the preponderant part of its obligations. If you think about it, in practice, most suppliers of components will also agree to provide the maintenance services for the components. So if you take that reality, then we should construe the maintenance part of the obligation as consequential upon the sale of the components themselves.
That's very true.
And since the respondent didn't contest the issue, perhaps we should not devote too much space to it in the award.
Well, I think that's exactly where I was, and I think that we really shouldn't be dealing with extraneous issues which have already been agreed by the parties. So perhaps we could put that aside then, Mr. Chairman.
Well, then, once more into the breach, dear friends.
Back to 53.
Yes. Well, look, let's just remind ourselves of what Article 53 says, if I may. The buyer must pay the price for the goods and take delivery of them as required by the contract and this convention. Now, the claimant has stressed Article 53 of the convention on how the respondent as the buyer breached his obligation to pay the contracted price and take delivery of the goods. What do you think of the arguments made by both parties?
Our first respondent used exemption arguments under Article 79 as his foremost arguments. But these arguments on Article 53 and its related provisions on the time of payments were also quite compelling.
Can I jump in on this point? I think I may have a little bit of a different point of view. Hear me out for a moment. It seems to me that in some ways, respondents' argument on Article 53 is in some ways a little bit too simplistic. I feel it's based on a kind of an overly literal reading of the text. The respondent, as you will recall here, asserts that the buyer should receive the goods before payment becomes due, and they say that this is a rule under the convention, this is a rule under the contract, and so on and so forth. But of course, the buyer is also obliged to accept delivery. So I wonder if a maybe more nuanced approach isn't what's called for here. After all, the evidence seemed to suggest, really, that the respondent was well aware that the claimant was manufacturing these Phase 2 components, and they were, to a certain extent, almost identified to the contract. And I think it's a bit of an exaggeration, then, to say that, well, the claimants were ahead of the production schedule. It was really only a couple of weeks. And if you look at all those factors, I think it really behooves us to look at this very carefully. this whole Article 53 issue very carefully against that evidence, I think.
Well, in that case, should we be concerned about the passing of risks?
Exactly, yeah.
Oh, that's quite a difficult issue.
We don't have much evidence.
Yeah, I wish the parties devoted more time to that.
Yeah.
Well, I think we need to think about it some more. So let's move on to the question of the respondent being exempt under Article 79(1). Now, both parties had a lot to say about it, so can I have your thoughts?
Here again, if I may, my own thought is that I think that the crucial element is the question of what is the standard for exemption. Can it really be said, for example, that the coup and the cancellation of the power contract were somehow impediments for the respondent? Maybe it was a convenient excuse for them not to perform under the guise of an impediment. And I think that raises the issue as to, what's the legal standard? What's the definition? What really is an impediment at law?
The language of provision certainly leaves a room for dispute. Does hardship qualify as an impediment?
Well, we all know that most legal systems do recognize situations of changed circumstances, but the conditions under which each of these legal traditions allows force majeure to be invoked vary quite a bit.
Can we take hardship to mean that performance of a disadvantaged party has become much more burdensome but not impossible, and impediment that used Article 79(1) to mean that performance has become, at least temporarily, impossible?
I see what you mean. I think that could be a reasonable approach, but I think that the yardstick, if you will, that we need to apply really should be what could reasonably have been expected from the party concerned. What would similar individuals have done in a similar situation?
Well, if I were to answer your question, then I think this is not a situation of impossibility, but more of hardship. We think that the respondent could in fact have acted to overcome the cancellation of the contract by making representations to the general, or negotiating with him, or even taking him to arbitration or to the courts. But there's simply no evidence been offered to show that Electoral Ace made any effort to enforce its rights.
It seemed like they were very happy to just pack up, ship out, and be done with it.
Precisely.
And other companies did manage and stay and continue operating in Eurasia. In fact, because Eurasia continued to be power hungry, and General Dome took a more lenient view toward investment.
Well, perhaps General Dome was a bit power hungry as well. Forgive the pun.
Okay, very good. I'll look into whether any other SIAC tribunal has faced this issue before. I understand that LexisNexis has published a volume of SIAC redacted arbitral word. So I think this might be helpful.
Well, thank you very much for that offer. That I'm sure will be very useful.
Exactly.
As we have seen, the arbitral tribunal goes to great lengths and delves into great depths to arrive at a well-reasoned decision on the dispute. This decision is set out in the award, which in terms of form is akin to a judgment. The award is enforceable in 148 countries worldwide because of the UN Convention on the Recognition and Enforcement of Foreign Arbitral Awards, 1958, better known simply as the New York Convention. In disputes such as this one, where there is more than one arbitrator, the tribunal decides by a majority. The arbitrators whose opinions differ from the majority may provide dissenting opinions or separate opinions, as the case may be. The presiding arbitrator usually prepares the draft award and then circulates it to his colleagues for comments. The draft award then goes to SIAC for the next critical phase, a phase which has earned SIAC its impressive track record of enforced awards, the scrutiny of the award by the SIAC Secretariat.